woven thread. Stories whispered, fears unsaid. Risk is shifting, tides can change, but hope remains within our range. Tell me where you stand tonight, in shadowed fear or gentle light. Are you pre or post the storm? Your state will shape how care is formed. The heart of steps is walking near, through ebb and flow, through doubt and fear. Together we listen, together we know. Risk may rise, but hope can grow. Beneath the pain, the roots run deep. The burdens carried, the vows we keep. Identity shaken, worth feels small. We name the source, we hear it all. The heart of steps is walking near, through ebb and flow, through doubt and fear. Together we listen, together we know. Risk may rise, but hope can grow. Some days the thoughts are faint then loud. They shift like weather, swift as clouds. From quiet dawn to restless night, we trace the span to guard the fight. The heart of steps is walking near, through ebb and flow, through doubt and fear. Together we listen, together we know. Risk may rise, but hope can grow. What if tomorrow's storms begin? If pressure mounts, if losses win, we plan ahead with care prepared. A map of safety, hope repaired. Static roots, stable ground. Dynamic tides that swirl around. Fluid moments tip the scale, but warning signs can tell the tale. The heart of steps is walking near, through ebb and flow, through doubt and fear. Together we listen, together we know. Risk may rise, but hope can grow. Hope may rise, and hope will grow.
Welcome back to the Protect podcast. This is season 4, episode 10. Only a few days ago, on the 10th of September, we marked World Suicide Prevention Day 2025. Around the globe, people gathered to honor lives lost, to break silence around stigma, and to renew our collective commitment to prevention. For that day, we released a song, Creating Hope Through Action, a reminder that hope isn't something abstract. It's something we build, share, and hold for one another in small, everyday ways. If you haven't heard it yet, I invite you to pause and listen to it, and then come back. Here's a small snippet.
remember the names, the lives, the years, stories carried through silence and tears. No label, no number can capture their song. Their voices remind us we all belong.
Hope, Emily said, is a bird in the soul, a feathered companion that sings and consoles.
But hope is not only a whisper or rhyme. It lives in our actions, it grows over time.
And if you did hear it, I'd love to hear from you. How did you mark World Suicide Prevention Day? What actions did you take, big or small, that created hope for you or for someone else? Send us a note, write a comment, share your reflections, because hope multiplies when it's spoken aloud. In today's episode, we carry that theme forward. We are going to explore what it really means to move from top, the only professional, only in caps, to tap, together as partners. This isn't just a technical shift, it's a mindset shift. When we stand as top, we slip into the fixer stance, asking, "What's the matter with you?" As if a diagnosis or a checklist could tell us everything we need to know. But when we step into tap, together as partners, the lens changes. We begin to ask instead, what matters to you? So this is the shift from what's the matter with you to what matters to you. It might seem like a play on words, but actually the change is seismic in the way in which we conduct ourselves, in the way in which we create the scaffolding of relational safety. And that's where safety lives in the long run, not in stripping people of agency, but in reconnecting them with values, strengths, and the anchors that already exist in their lives. We'll explore this more fully in the source section of this episode. And to help us put these mindset shifts into practice, today we step into the heart of the STEPS model. This is where concept and practice meet, where theory bends down to sit at the bedside, where our questions stop being generic checklists and become relational doorways. The heart of the steps rests on 4 anchors: state, source, span, and scenario. Each one offers a different lens. Together, they help us meet a person not only in the present moment, but across the shifting tides of risk, pain, and resilience. And woven through these anchors is the way we operationalize the practice shifts from the last episode. So first one, prediction to prevention. This comes alive when we look at risk not as a blunt label of high, medium, or low, but as layers that morph over time: static, stable, dynamic, and fluid risks that require us to prepare, not predict. More about this as we go through the episode. It will be a recurring theme. Past to future emerges perhaps most clearly in scenario planning, but it is there all the way through all the steps of the STEPS framework. It turns our gaze from what has already happened to the situations waiting just ahead and preparing for those moments. And deficits to assets takes form when we explore the source, not just the pain that overwhelms, but also the values and strengths that sustain, waiting to be reconnected. And when you combine all of these 3 together, the deeper move from fixer to enabler, from top to tap, that runs through it all. It shapes how we listen, how we ask, how we share responsibility in a way that honors the dignity of risk and the person's right to steer their own ship. So we walk through these 4 anchors. Notice how they don't replace the practice shifts, they bring them to life. They give us structure and freedom, heart and brain, presence and preparation. So let's walk through each of the four anchors, beginning with the first, state. This is understanding where the person is. Where are they when we interact with them, when we meet them? So this is about asking, where is the person right now? Not in some abstract sense, but right now, in the moment of sitting together. Are they before an attempt or after? Are they in predisposition, ideation, intention, or action? Getting this right matters because the questions we ask, the curiosity we show, that depends on it. In Fabric, we learned how to ask questions that uncover predisposition. In Thread, we explored how to gently engage ideation. In Needle, we practiced how to detect intention. And in Tip, we confronted what it means when a person has crossed into action. Each state requires a different stance. And the sooner we understand where someone primarily resides, the sooner we can shape the right conversation. Often, we can tell within the first few minutes if someone says, I'm struggling, but I've not had those thoughts. We know we are in predisposition. If they say, I've been having the thoughts, but I haven't made any plans, we know we are in ideation. If there are clear signs of rehearsal, of preparation, then we may be crossing into intention. And if the person arrives after an act of harm, then we are in the post attempt phase, a state that requires its own delicate questions. Take Ari. When she first came back after her attempt, she was still raw. The questions circled around safety in the immediate aftermath, how she made it through, what supported her in those fragile hours, what needed to be in place to stop another rupture. But a month later, she looked different. She had regained much of her baseline. She spoke about her job again, her friendships, her routines. And yet, beneath it, something stirred. Maybe a new disappointment, a new pressure, and the thoughts began to creep back in. Not at the intensity of before, but there, it's just there like background noise. Her treating clinician asked, Ari, over the last couple of weeks, how have things shifted for you? Compared to, say, when you left hospital, where do you think you are now? Ari paused. It's not like before. I'm not making plans. But the evenings, they are harder. That's when it feels close again. That one answer told the clinician something vital. Ari was not back in acute danger, but she wasn't fully in predisposition either. She was hovering in ideation, pulled toward intention in certain moments. That knowledge guided the next questions. Not a checklist, but relational doorways. What makes evenings harder? Who do you reach for when they come? This is the essence of state. It's not a label we stamp on someone, it's a way of orienting ourselves. And it isn't static. A person can shift state from week to week, even from day to day. On Monday, Ari may be coping, leaning on her flatmate, walking her dog. By Thursday night, after a harsh conversation or a letter that lands the wrong way, she may slide closer to intention. That is why when we ask about state, we don't only ask, where are you today? We also ask, where have you been in the last fortnight? What is emerging right now? We'll talk more about this when we cover span, which is the third of those steps that we are talking about today. And in those answers, we find not only presence but also fluctuation. And by noticing fluctuation, we create a map we can actually work with. State is not about prediction, it's about presence. It's about listening carefully enough to locate the person on their continuum and then adjusting our curiosity, our questions accordingly. It's about noticing when Ari says, the thoughts aren't constant, but they spike at night, and treating that not as background noise, but as a compass for care. In the end, state helps us answer the first question of safety. Where are they standing now, and how far is that from where they have been? So, as I said, we will talk more about it in span when we talk about fluctuations. Okay, moving on to source, tracing the root of emotional pain. So if state helps us locate where someone is now, source asks why it hurts there. Not as a diagnostic label, but as a human story. Pain is nature's signal, a flare on the horizon saying something matters here. Often it matters so deeply that when it feels threatened or lost, the urge to escape that pain becomes understandable, even compelling. This is the pivot from what's the matter with you to what matters to you. People are not diagnosis or a neat constellation of symptoms. They are daughters, friends, colleagues, creators, people whose values have been bruised or broken by circumstance. When we trace the source of pain, we also begin to glimpse the source of hope. The same values, relationships, and roles that now ache are often the very ones that can be rebuilt, mended, or reapproached with small committed steps. With Ari, this came into focus quickly. She describes a pressure in her chest whenever work emails arrive, a hollowed out feeling when she avoided her community group, and a sharp sting of shame each time she needed help instead of offering it. The clinician didn't catalog symptoms, they listened for values. Work for Ari wasn't just a job, it signaled purpose and contribution. The community group wasn't a calendar item, it represented belonging. Asking for help rubbed against her dignity as a giver. The pain pointed like a compass. Purpose, belonging, dignity. These were the coordinates. We will talk about this in a lot more detail as we go through the hope framework, and then we'll get into the values method where we'll talk about actual techniques that will help with locating the value adjacent to the pain. So, when the conversation turned gently toward meaning, Ari admitted that what hurt most wasn't simply anxiety, it was the fear that she no longer counted. She said that on good weeks, she felt like herself when she mentored a junior colleague or cooked for friends. On difficult weeks, she withdrew, scrolling late at night, skipping the very routines that used to stitch her days together. The clinician held the map up to the light. If purpose and connection are at the heart of Ari's pain, they may also be the heart of her recovery. So they translated pain into practice. Instead of how do we stop the thoughts, they asked how do we reconnect you to what matters. That shift moved them from deficits to assets. If the wound is lost purpose, then one stitch is small contribution. So, a 10-minute daily handover with a team where she offers one concrete support, a weekly mentoring call that keeps her competence alive even on flat days. If the ache is disconnection, then a stitch is gentle belonging. A low stakes return to her community group for the first half hour only, or a standing coffee with a friend who doesn't flinch. If the sting is feeling like a burden, then a stitch is reciprocity. Pairing any ask for support with one small act of giving that Ari chooses, sharing a recipe, proofreading a paragraph, watering a neighbor's plants. None of this denies risk. It converts what matters into steps that can hold, short, doable moves that bring Ari back into contact with her values. It is values aligned, committed action, not a grand fix, but a series of small bridges. A month later, Ari returned looking steadier, but unsettled. She'd had a run of fractured sleep and a terse message from a supervisor. Old pain flickered. She noticed how quickly she defaulted to isolation, canceling the community group, letting dishes pile up, ignoring messages. Instead of reheating the deficit story, I always fail when it gets hard, the clinician invited a value story. When you are at your best, what are you protecting? When you feel proud, what are you doing? Ari named three anchors: showing up kindly, making something with her hands, and leaving places a little better. That was enough to design the week. Take kindness. One deliberate, brief check in with a colleague on Tuesday. Making. So, cook a single pan dinner on Wednesday, no perfection required. Betterment. A 15-minute desk reset on Friday before logging off. Notice the logic: source, values, micro steps. Pain illuminated the map, values chose the route, small actions moved her feet. We'll talk a lot more about this in the Hope framework that will come on to after this sequence of 10 episodes. So, source work also helps us language the distress more truthfully. Instead of, I am broken, Ari began to say, I am far from my values today. Instead of, I'm a burden, she tried, I am needing more than I like right now, and I can still contribute something small. That change in wording isn't cosmetic. Language shapes what people reach for in the hard minutes. And there's a protective bonus. By naming what matters and rehearsing micro steps, we create prevention pathways that are specific. If loneliness is the accelerant, then then plans can target reconnection precisely. If Saturday afternoon goes quiet and heavy, then I will send 2 messages from my green list and step outside for 5 minutes before deciding what next. If shame is the spark, then the plan counters it with reciprocal acts that restore dignity. Sometimes source is not a single route, but a braid. Grief for a role that's changed, fear of disappointing family, exhaustion from carrying too much. Here, the task is still the same. Trace the threads and look for the values woven through them. Family may point to loyalty and care. Work may point to craft and contribution. Rest may point to self-respect. Each thread suggests an action that is both meaningful and stabilizing. 2 cautions protect the work. We don't argue someone out of their pain by pointing to assets. We stand with the pain first. Pain is evidence of love and value. We honor it. Then, when the room is steady, we ask where the love points. Number 2, we don't pretend that a strengths list erases danger. We use it to fortify the hours where risk rises. Integrating values steps right into safety planning. So by the end of this segment, Ari could see that the source of her pain, purpose threatened, belonging thinned, dignity bruised, also revealed the source of her hope. The plan on paper didn't read like a correction. It read like a reconnection. That's the heart of source. Treat pain as a message from values. Let what matters guide what's next. And in doing so, we make the third practice shift real in the room, from deficits to assets. Without denying the storm, that's really important. We simply help the person find their strongest timbers and start repairing from there. This now brings us to span. How close to the bridge and what held it open? So if state is our snapshot of now, span is the time lapse. It asks, across the last days and weeks, how close did Ari come to crossing the ideation action divide? Because the heart of suicide prevention is simple and precise. Keep that bridge open. In many areas of health, we close the gap between intention and action. Quit plans become quit lines, right, for smoking. Exercise goals become gym visits for managing your weight. Here, we do the opposite. We learn exactly when, why, and how the gap narrows and what kept it from closing so we can widen it again. With Ari, we didn't just chart how often she had thoughts. We zoomed in on the peaks, the nines and tens on a personal 0 to 10 scale. You can use the Safe Life Guide mobile application for mapping suicidal ideation and its intensity. So let's say Ari is using Safe Life Guide and she has been every day putting in her rating for the strength and the intensity of the suicidal ideation. And let's say for 2 weeks, she had been bubbling at somewhere between 3 to 5. But there were 3 spikes, one after a tense supervision email, one on a sleepless Wednesday at 2 a.m., and one after she saw photos from a gathering she had skipped. In research terms, these would be called outliers, right? So that's the error that they would take out from the analysis. In prevention terms, they are signals, the moments when ideation leaned toward intention. We almost need to rethink whole of suicide prevention research because our researchers which neglect them, those outliers, as error. But what if that is the signal? So we sit with each of those spikes frame by frame. The supervision email spike. This could be fluid risk or dynamic risk, depending on what's going on at work. So Ari opened the message, felt her chest lock, pictured clearing the desk, then shut the laptop and stood frozen at the sink. What narrowed the bridge? Shame, perceived failure, sudden loss of control. What kept it open, even a sliver? She remembered a colleague once saying, "Message me if those thoughts get loud," and sent 2 words. Bad email. The colleague replied within minutes, "Step outside, I've got 5. Tiny act, big consequences. Reciprocal connection widened the gap. Let's look at the 2 a.m. spike. This may be a fluid risk. 2 nights of poor sleep, which would be dynamic risk. Scrolling, lots of that, and a storm outside. She laid out her meds, counted doses, rehearsal, not action, then put them back one by one. What narrowed the bridge? Exhaustion, isolation, rumination. What held it open? A sticky note on the mirror from last session. 5 breaths, 5 senses, 5 minutes outside. She did the routine and texted her sister a moon emoji. Their pre-agreed "I am not okay" signal. Prepared cue plus micro ritual kept ground under her feet. Let's take the third scenario, the mist gathering spike. Okay, so this may be a stable and a dynamic risk interaction. So longer term loneliness, which would be stable, met a fresh pang of exclusion, dynamic. So she walked to the bus stop, considered riding to that place. So what narrowed the bridge? Comparing mind, I don't belong. What held it open? A promise she had made to herself in session: if I am near the bus after 9 p.m., I call, not decide. So she phoned. They walked the block together on speaker. So this is an if-then plan which caught the moment, which we'll talk about next in scenarios and scenario planning. So this is span work in practice, not a generic tally of thoughts, but a forensic kindness with the near bridge hours. The who, what, where, and when of narrowing. The who, what, where, and when of holding. So we also named the layers of risk that shape these diets. Static. This is the unchangeable background risk that we often explore through fabric in the predisposition phase. Family history, age. This is context, not countdown. Stable. This is the slow-moving risk. Chronic insomnia phases, long-standing perfectionism, seasonal isolation. These set the baseline level of the river. Then there is dynamic risk, fast shifting, emails, conflicts, setbacks. These are sudden rains that raise the water quickly. We are talking about days here, whereas the stable risk was more like weeks to months. This is days to weeks. And then there's fluid risk, moment to moment. This is kind of hour to hour, things can change. 2 a.m. wakefulness, an empty kitchen, a harsh inner voice. These are the rip currents at the surface. Why does this matter? Because prediction stumbles here. A category like low, medium, high risk flattens a moving sea into a single snapshot. Span restores motion and tells us when prevention must bite. It teaches us to ask different questions. Across the last 1 to 2 weeks, when were you closest to acting? What exactly happened in the 60 minutes before that peak? What kept you from crossing even one small thing? We're talking about the ideation action divide. How do we bottle that one small thing and place it earlier next time? With Ari, we turned answers into if-then guardrails. This is the heart of scenario planning. These guardrails that widen the bridge on purpose. If an unexpected performance email lands after 5 p.m., then she forwards it to her green list colleague and schedules a 5-minute outside call before replying. If she wakes at 1:30 a.m., then she follows the 555 grounding, moves to the couch, so new context, and sends the moon emoji. No explanations required. If she finds herself at the 9 p.m. bus stop, then she calls before deciding and walks a single block while talking. If 3 moderate days back up, 4 to 6 on a scale, then she activates a span reset. Shorten work exposure by 1 hour, add 1 low effort belonging act, drop a heart on the group chat, not a paragraph, and schedule a 10-minute craft task that signals competence to herself. Crucially, SPAN doesn't just log danger. It harvests assets. Each non-crossing moment reveals protective factors we can strengthen. Ari's willingness to send a 2-word text, a colleague's availability, a sibling signal, a grounding ritual that lives on a sticky note. When we name these, we convert I almost into I also. I almost acted. I also reached, paused, breathed, messaged. That language widens the path back to safety. For teams, SPAN reframes documentation. Alongside frequency and intensity, we record proximity to action, conditions of narrowing, and conditions of widening. We map peaks on a simple timeline, circle 9s and 10s in a different color, and write the micro moves that kept the bridge open. Over time, patterns emerge. Tuesday late day emails, second night of poor sleep, post-event photos, and our prevention plan relocates upstream. So you can do all of this on the Safe Life Guide mobile application, where you can do the mapping of your suicidal ideation in terms of your intensity, and you can write little reflective notes which will give you the patterns. So download the Safe Life Guide mobile application, and under logs, you can find this both for suicidal ideation and for self-harm. Finally, SPAN keeps us values-led, so let's not forget that. When we asked Ari, what did you protect when you paused? She said, being the kind of person who checks, not vanishes. That value, showing up kindly, became both motive and method. The more her plan expressed that value, brief check-ins, one helpful act, honest signals, the more sticky the prevention became. That SPAN, a compassionate audit of closeness to action and deliberate practice of strengthening whatever kept the bridge open. So we can place those strengths earlier, easier, and closer at hand next time. So we're now on to scenario. Well, we have been talking about scenario through the span as well, because these steps in the steps model are all interlinked. But let's get into scenario, planning the road ahead together. So if stage shows us where Ari is now, source reveals what hurts and what matters, and span maps how close she has come to the bridge, the ideation action divide, then scenario is where we finally turn our gaze to the road ahead. This is where the practice shift becomes real, from past to future, from deficits to assets, from prediction to prevention. And let's be candid for a moment. Think about the typical hour we spend in assessment. How much of that time goes to the past? 50 minutes, 55 minutes if you have an hour? And then right at the end, maybe 5 minutes squeezed in on what's next. That is if we are lucky. But prevention doesn't live in the past. It lives in tomorrow afternoon, in next weekend, in the second night of broken sleep. Scenario work is about rebalancing the hour. So keep the AIMS framework in mind. AIM standing for, remember, assessment, intervention, monitoring, and step up or step down. So don't keep it abstract. We apply it directly to the scenarios Ari is likely to face before we see her again. So assessment, which situations are most likely in the next 7 to 14 days? Which combination of static risks, background factors, stable risks, slow moving, dynamic risk, fast changing, and fluid risk, moment to moment shifts could narrow her bridge? Intervention, what can we put in place now? Skills, supports, changes in environment, means safety that will blunt those risks, widen the ideation action divide. Next is monitoring. Who notices what and how often? Is it Ari herself, a sibling, a GP, a colleague, or the community team? What's the signal that should trigger a check in? Step up or step down? What thresholds tell us to move care up a level? And what signs allow us to step back without abandoning? It's also where the TAP mindset lives, together as partners, clarity on who does what, when, where, and how. Ari has a part, family and friends have a part, clinicians have a part. The plan is distributed, realistic, and shared. From SPAN, we already know where the water rises for Ari. Now we turn those danger points into rehearsed plays. Take the first one, work. So we've talked about this. Imagine an email landing after hours. The kind that makes your heart sink. For Ari, that's a volatile moment. Evening tiredness collides with a sharp trigger, and in the past she might have spiraled all night. But together we rehearse something different. If that email arrives after 5, Ari forwards it to her trusted colleague with the subject line "Sense check." She doesn't reply straight away. Instead, she steps outside, takes 5 minutes to ground herself, and only then drafts a short 2-sentence response. No long defensive essays written in the dark. And her laptop, it now locks automatically at 9:30. Her phone switches into focus mode with crisis contacts pinned. Small frictions designed on purpose, widening that ideation action divide. The bridge we don't want it to form, right? The second hotspot, we talked about sleep. Ari knows she can survive one bad night, but by the second, her thoughts grow darker, so we practice it ahead of time. It's past 1:30 on the second night. She shifts rooms, makes tea, and listens to a compassion script saved on her phone. Her medication isn't lying loose on the bedside table anymore. It's in a blister pack. It's in a locked box. The key held by someone else she trusts. Again, friction engineered in advance. Keep that ideation action divide open. And then there's the weekend, Friday night, when plans collapse and loneliness swells after 9 p.m. For Ari, those empty hours are treacherous, so she has a plan B. If plans fall through, she takes a 20-minute walk while on speakerphone with a walk buddy. Back home, she does something, hands busy, folding laundry, cooking, or a small craft project. She also drops a quick message into her group chat. Belonging doesn't always mean deep talk. Sometimes it's just a tiny act that reminds you you are part of a thread. From tipping points to protective combination, that's what we are going for. Can you notice in these three examples what's happening here? We don't just name the tipping points, the email, the insomnia, the loneliness. We also build protective combinations. So from tipping points to protective combinations. Light, movement, connection, small values-based acts. When Ari says one of her deepest values is showing up kindly, we weave it into each of those if-then plans. A kind word to herself, a supportive text to a colleague, a small act of connection to a friend. Prevention sticks when it's tied to identity, and identity relates to values. But more about that in the HOPE framework and the values method. So we are trying to make it practical. We don't leave it floating in conversation. We document each scenario in a way that can be lifted straight into a care plan. So the scenario and risk layers. Was it static, stable, dynamic, or fluid? The if-then sequence. 3 clear steps. Plain language. Time stamped where relevant. The who, when, where, how. This is the clarity of TAP together as partners. The thresholds, what monitoring looks like, and what step up or step down means. That transforms documentation, our notes, from narrative summaries into operational safety. So think about the hour you have. You're sitting next to Ari or with anyone you are supporting. Think about your time splits. 20 minutes on the past week, just enough to surface the peaks where the bridge narrowed. 30 minutes on scenario building, 2 or 3 what ifs. Each one of them is rehearsed, and 10 minutes on clarity. Who does what, when, where, and how, and write it down in the person's own words. Photograph it, print it, stick it on the fridge. On the ward, rehearse the first hour of the ward. In the community, rehearse the first difficult evening. Scenario is rehearsal, and rehearsal is prevention. So you have learned about patients doing suicide rehearsal when they are transitioning from intention to action and the bridge forms across ideation to action. Now, we want to do safety rehearsals, which will keep that bridge open. This is where TAP breathes. Together as professionals, we are designing those scenarios. We stop trying to control the uncontrollable and instead co-design what control will look like when life gets loud. We accept the reality of static and stable risks. We watch for dynamic and fluid shifts. And then we place practical, values-true actions right where the bridge tends to narrow. That's how prevention becomes possible. Not someday, but this week. Okay, so before we close, let's pull the risk threads through the whole cloth. When we sit with Ari, risk isn't one blunt label. It has layers. Static risks are the background, unchangeable facts that set baseline vulnerability. We have talked about it in fabric through predisposition. Stable risks shift slowly. Longer-term drivers like chronic illness, loneliness, or insecure housing. Often they give rise to the ideation phase. Dynamic risks move fast, life events, ruptures, relapses, new stress at work. And this is where you might have intention formation. And then there is fluid risks. These are the minute-to-minute swells, poor sleep, a cutting comment, and evening dip. And this is where people might go from intention into action very quickly, where the ideation-action divide closes. In practice, warning signs always trump risk factors. What matters most is what Ari is showing us now. Agitation, rehearsing methods, withdrawing, hopelessness that tightens. These are the signals to act on today, not those long-term static or stable risk factors. We also hold the time shape of risk in mind. Acute risk, a sudden storm that needs immediate shelter. chronic risk, a long winter that calls for steady warmth and routine. And then you have those really risky acute-on-chronic moments, particularly in patients living with chronic suicidality like borderline personality disorder. It's like a storm inside a winter. Urgent action now, plus sustained support after. This is where the 4S of the STEPS model, that work earns its keep. State keeps us oriented. Pre-attempt or post-attempt, predisposition, ideation, intention, action. The questions we ask change with the ground under Ari's feet. Source shows us what matters and what hurts, often the very same places where hope and values live. Span maps the nearest narrows in the bridge. How close has she come to crossing ideation into action, and what held her back? And then scenario rehearses the next bends in the road. If this, then what? So prevention becomes something we do together, not something we hope for. And through it all, we stay with TAP together as partners, not who is responsible, but who is responsible for what, when, where, and how. Ari, her people, and we, each with a clear role. That shared clarity is part of safety itself. So here, at the heart of STEPS, we have talked through the 4 anchors: state, source, span, scenario. Together, they turn box ticking into relational safety you can feel. We understand where Ari is, what hurts and what matters, how close she's come to the edge, and what we will actually do when life gets loud. That's the moment from prediction to prevention, from past to future, from deficits to asset, and from top to tap. In our next episode, we will take the next stitch, the hope framework, our values-based way of weaving acceptance and commitment therapy into everyday conversations. We have done a few episodes on this previously when we were introducing the hope view of the Safe Life Guide mobile application. So you can take a look at that as well. We will ground safety in what matters most and translate values into tiny, doable actions that carry Ari and those we serve through the week ahead. Because in the end, safety isn't found in certainty, it's found in presence, partnership, and preparation, and in the steady work of aligning care with values that last.
Every life's a woven thread, stories whispered, fears unsaid. Risk is shifting, tides can change, but hope remains within our range.
Tell me where you stand tonight, in shadowed fear or gentle light. Are you pre or post the storm? Your state will shape how care is formed. The heart of STEPS is walking near, through ebb and flow, through doubt and fear. Together we listen, together we know. Risk may rise, but hope can grow.
Beneath the pain, the roots run deep. The burdens carried, the vows we keep. Identity is shaken, worth feels small. We name the source, we hear it all. The heart of STEPS is walking near, through ebb and flow, through doubt and fear. Together we listen, together we know. Risk may rise, Some days the thoughts are faint and loud. They shift like weather, swift as clouds. From quiet dawn to restless night, we trace the span to guard the fight. The heart of steps is walking near, through ebb and flow, through doubt and fear. Together we listen, together we know, risk may rise, but hope can grow. What if tomorrow's storms begin? If pressure mounts, if losses win, we plan ahead with care prepared, a map of safety, hope prepared. Static roots, stable ground, dynamic tides that swirl around. Fluid moments tip the scale, but warning signs can tell the tale.